Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca famously begins with a dream. The narrator telling us, last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. And the dream is really composed of imagery of the great ancient mansion Manderley in a state of serious decay, which tells us, of course, that the narrator and Max de Winter, now living in various hotels throughout Europe, are no longer living in Manderley because, for some reason, we don't know what, Manderley has indeed fallen into decay, is abandoned, they don't live there. Well, the novel ends with another dream of the narrator. Quite interesting one that undercuts a lot of the conclusions that the novel has been suggesting for the last 100 pages or so. So it makes sense to have a look at this second dream of the narrator of the novel, Rebecca. So, what has happened? Maxim has admitted to murdering Rebecca, and we, after several heart-thumping pages, learn about the circumstances of the murdering of Rebecca. We learn what was going on in Rebecca's life. We learn what Maxim's motivations might be. We see Maxim very much threatened with being captured for his murder and therefore being put in prison for life or perhaps executed. But we also get to see his getting off from the crime through circumstances very favorable to himself. The magistrate concludes that, yes, Rebecca committed suicide, and Rebecca had motive for committing suicide because Rebecca had been told by a physician the day of her death that she had terminal cancer. When Maxim tells our narrator that he murdered Rebecca, she is relieved. She's overjoyed because suddenly now she realizes that the narrator doesn't still love Rebecca. Now the narrator realizes that Maxim does not love Rebecca, that indeed Maxim never loved Rebecca, and she is totally untroubled by the fact that her husband is a murderer. In fact, she sees the killing of Rebecca to be a spark that brings to life their romance for the first time. Not 24 hours before, it is revealed that Rebecca is in the sailboat underneath the larger vessel that has become grounded in the bay. The narrator almost commits suicide. Mrs. Danvers seduces her, saying, "Why don't you try it? Why don't you jump? Why don't you jump from the window of Manderley and kill yourself because no one loves you? Everyone wants you to go." And the narrator is just on the verge of jumping when there's a crack of an explosion, which is the sign that the ship has run aground. So from this moment on, the narrator has new confidence. She no longer feels insecure around the staff. She no longer feels dwarfed by Rebecca. She feels strong, confident, empowered, as if she can help Maxim go through his various trials. And then after Maxim tells her that he killed Rebecca, she feels even better. And the two of them start sharing feelings with each other like they have not done so before. Maxim is more vulnerable with her like he has not been before. And it appears that their romance is really coming to life, and that our narrator herself is really coming to life, and that ultimately she can now escape the influence of Rebecca. Ultimately, the Maxim might also be able to escape the influence of Rebecca, and the two of them are destined to have a lovely relationship together. But the final dream pushes against this positive narrative. As Maxim and the narrator are driving back from London, where they have gain the information that Rebecca suffered from terminal cancer, and that this information will make the authorities comfortable with the verdict of suicide instead of investigating Maxim for murder. As they're driving back from London to Manderley, driving back late at night, the narrator is very drowsy. She slips in and out of dreams. And her final dream goes like this. She says, in my dream, I was writing letters in the morning room. I was sending out invitations. I wrote them all myself with a thick black pen. But when I looked down to see what I had written, it was not my small square handwriting at all. It was long and slanted, with curious pointed strokes. I pushed the cards away from the blotter and hid them. I got up and went to the looking glass. A face stared back at me that was not my own. It was very pale, very lovely, framed in a cloud of dark hair. The eyes narrowed and smiled. The lips parted. The face in the glass stared back at me and laughed. And I saw then that she was sitting on a chair before the dressing table in her bedroom, and Maxim was brushing her hair. He held her hair in his hands, and as he brushed it, he wound it slowly into a thick rope. It twisted like a snake, and he took hold of it with both hands and smiled at Rebecca and put it round his neck. Well, the narrator awakens soon after to Manderley burning. So this dream is very odd. The first thing to note, obviously, is that in this dream, the narrator identifies with Rebecca. She is sitting in the morning room where Rebecca did all her correspondence, and she is writing with Rebecca's pen and looks down at the handwriting, and it is Rebecca's handwriting. Then she goes to the mirror, and what does she see? Rebecca staring back at her, the woman with dark hair. And then it's once identified with Rebecca, her dreamer's eye zooms out, and she sees Rebecca now in a bedroom, sitting at her dressing table, and Maxim is brushing her hair. But of course, this figure is both Rebecca and the narrator. And he braids the hair into a very thick braid that looks like a snake. And then he takes the braid in both of his hands and wraps it around his neck. So what's going on here? So the first thing to note is that if we want to take this dream seriously as a manifestation of the narrator's unconscious, and certainly Maurier has invited us to do such things with dreams throughout this novel, we have to wonder, why is it that the narrator, who seems to be free of the influence of Rebecca, who seems to be free of her fear of Rebecca, who seems to be free of her desire to be Rebecca, who seems to have come into her own as her own self, why is she now, at a moment when one would think she would be most free of the influence of Rebecca, why is she now dreaming of being Rebecca? And what kind of Rebecca is she being? When she looks at Rebecca, what does she see in the face? The eyes narrow and smile. Well, does this suggest the deceitfulness, the cleverness of Rebecca? Maxim accuses her of deceit and cleverness, the eyes narrowing, the smile. Or is this more of a sexual gaze? Because we learn that after the eyes narrow and smile, the lips part, suggesting a kind of erotic yearning. So is the narrator here wishing that she could have the traits of Rebecca? Does she wishes that she could be sexual like Rebecca was? We learn from Mrs. Danvers that Rebecca was a prolific lover. She took many lovers and did not have any feelings for them whatsoever. She behaved more like a man than a woman, given the gender stereotypes at the time. She loved them and left them. And this is part of what made her so unseemly, of course, to Maxim, her husband. But she was a woman who did not conform to the patriarchal conventions of the time. Patriarchal conventions which proposed a double standard, that it was okay for men to sleep around, boys will be boys, but it was not okay for women to do so. Does the narrator want the sexual power and prowess of Rebecca? Uh, does she feel still that she doesn't have a vibrant sexual relationship with Maxim? Probably. They do make out in a passionate way once Maxim comes clean to her, but still he remains aloof and cold. One can imagine he was aloof and cold even with Rebecca. Maxim is not a man of passion. In fact, he is so able to live via a mask that he does not betray a bit of guilt, really to betray any of his interiors to the authorities investigating the crime. He's able to stay cool the whole time. This, of course, keeps him from the gallows, but also makes us question a man who can repress his feelings so strongly. It seems extreme. So it seems that the narrator still wants to be Rebecca, but not Rebecca as socialite, but Rebecca as sexual being. What is it that we want to say further? Does the narrator now want to be Rebecca also because she realizes that they have a shared femininity? Does she suddenly feel an allegiance with Rebecca over her allegiance to Maximum? Why? She learns that Rebecca wanted to die, that she enticed Maxim to kill her because she had terminal cancer. Does the narrator feel a kind of sympathy for the pain? It's cancer in the uterus. It's a kind of cancer that only women can get, which suggests, yes, literal cancer, but also maybe the pain of women's bodies in this patriarchal world, where women have to suffer injustices that men do not, where women are judged by standards much stricter than the ones that men judge themselves by. Does our narrator unconsciously now side with Rebecca against someone like Maxim, who, again, can be seen as a man who is emotionally distant, a man who is more a mask than a person, a man who overvalues convention and ritual? We never ask ourselves, was Maxim a good husband? Well, according to him, Rebecca early on said, I'm going to screw around on you. I don't care what you do. I'll take care of Manderley, but I'm going to screw around on you. Maybe part of the reason she does this is because Maxim is a really terrible husband. He doesn't come across to our narrator certainly as a very good husband. It's a man who's kind of a cold fish, kind of emotionally dead. And moreover, he's capable of killing his wife and living with that crime without really mentioning it at all to anyone, in particular his new wife. There's a really chilling line when he's telling the narrator about killing Rebecca. And as he watches in the reminiscence Rebecca bleed, he says, I'd forgotten how much a person bleeds when shot. Well, how would he know how a person bleeds when shot? So there's something murderous and violent and repressive and aloof and distant about Maxim de Winter. The name says it all. Maxim rules, de Winter, death. So maybe there's a sense of solidarity now, unconsciously, between the narrator and Rebecca. They are both women who suffer the pains of women in a patriarchal society, and in particular, they are connected to a man who is imperious and deadly. Well, getting to the end of the dream, the braid that Maxim makes twists like a snake, suggesting that the so-called evil of Rebecca, her snake-like qualities, her serpent-like qualities, her demonic qualities, using biblical imagery. Maybe it is Maxim who made this of her. Maybe it is he who pushed her to this. He's the one who makes the snake-like braid. So does the narrator now think that Max should take some of the responsibility for Rebecca's life? Maybe. And then, of course, the Maxim in the dream takes the braid that is now the snake that he has made and puts it around his neck. Well, this could show the narrator having fear that, yes, Maxim would be hung if he were found out. The braid / snake is a kind of noose. Or is it the narrator wanting Maxim dead? Wanting him to be hung, wanting him to be punished for the crime that he committed, maybe. Or just maybe wanting him dead because he himself is a man of death. That's a fairly extreme reading given the conscious life of our narrator. But given the incidents of the past few days, we can see how the narrator might, again, to recapitulate, the narrator might want to be part of Rebecca's erotic power, how the narrator might have sympathy for the female pain in Rebecca, how the narrator might suspect that Maxim had something to do with the so-called dissolute life of Rebecca, and the narrator perhaps feeling Maxim as a kind of nemesis. She wakes up and Manderley is burning down. Who burns Manderley down? Mrs. Danvers, who of course is a proxy for Rebecca. Is there a way in which the narrator wants the house to burn down? The sign of Maxim's patriarchy? Maybe. Of course, what happens, as we know from the beginning of the novel, after Manderley has been destroyed, Maxim and the narrator live very boring, monotonous lives, about as far away from the way Rebecca lived as possible, going from hotel to hotel in Europe, drinking tea and reading British newspapers to each other. So it's one of the many ironies of this novel showing up in this last dream, that just when we think that we've reached a kind of certainty about our narrator and what characterizes her and her relationship to Maxim, there is an ambiguity that at the very last minute encourages us to see her development as perhaps a sham, and that in her deeper being she wants to be Rebecca and sees Maxim as a nemesis.